The Biden administration is sending 800 new troops to the border to assist with the migrant influx. The active duty personnel will focus on, quote, logistics and other functions at the border to allow more Customs and Border Protection agents and officers to return to their core mission and responsibilities, the Hill reports. The Department of Defense has already deployed 2,500 state National Guard personnel to assist the Department of Homeland Security at the border. The administration has also agreed to make approximately 470,000 Venezuelan migrants eligible for work permits to help ease the financial strain on major migrant destinations, according to the Wall Street Journal. Texas Governor Greg Abbott has declared an invasion at the southern border, writing on X, quote, "I officially declared an invasion at our border because of Biden's policies. We deployed the Texas National Guard, DPS, and local law enforcement. We are building a border wall, razor wire, and marine barriers. We are also repelling migrants."
2020 presidential candidate Tulsi Gabbard discussed the current immigration situation in the United States on Fox News last week.
It is very clear that this president and his administration, they don't care about securing this country. They don't care about the interests and well-being of the American people who are being impacted, very negatively impacted by the Biden-Harris administration open border policy. So you have people who not only live in the southern border states. Now, as you're seeing there in that footage of New York, people all across the country are being impacted by these unprecedented levels of illegal immigrants crossing the border, and it's the cartels and the human traffickers are the ones who are benefiting and profiting from all this. It is an open border policy, and what we're seeing is, no matter how many times Mayorkas or anyone from the Biden administration or Democrat elites in Congress, they say, oh, the border policies are working, the border is secure. Everybody coming across the border knows that it's not and that they can get away with this. We got to go back to the Trump policy of remain in Mexico. We got to go back to the policy of actually securing our borders, whether through physical or electronic means. And Congress and the administration have to work together to fix these broken asylum laws.
Gabbard tweeted, "Our open borders are a playground for gangs, cartels, and traffickers. It's time to end the Biden-Harris open border policy, reinstate Trump's effective remain in Mexico policy, secure our border with physical barriers, high tech, and more border guards, and demand Congress overhauls our archaic immigration laws." I think she's right. I mean, Americans are seeing 45,000, possibly 100,000+ over the next couple of days or weeks coming to the country, and they're thinking, how is this legal? We can't go into Mexico and stay as long as we want, or Germany or France or any other country for that matters. Why should we allow people to just come into the United States with no repercussions? And then they say, well, they have to come back before a judge in 3 years. Most of them don't. So then they become a stain on the American taxpayer.
So the reason why some people can come to the United States in a way that they can't go to other countries is because we have asylum laws that we used to be very proud of that are reflected in the text on the Statue of Liberty that we often cite, that allow people who are facing religious persecution, political persecution, violence, persecution for their identity to come to the United States and be able to be processed for asylum here. The problem is that the administrative law judges, the lawyers that are tasked with processing all of those claims are incredibly overwhelmed. And I do think we should all be talking about the fundamental source of the problem. Why are there these ebbs and flows in the rates of immigration that happen, I gotta say, not in accordance with who's in office in the United States of America, but with our foreign policy? You're having a flood of Venezuelan immigrants in particular, largely related to the crushing sanctions that the United States puts on Venezuela and impedes it from having a functioning economy. And when you have American foreign policy that makes people in various countries around the world unable to subsist, unable to get resources, unable to farm, subject to drug violence that is also a consequence of some of our policies, our gun manufacture, these kinds of things, then you're going to have to deal with the consequences of immigration. So I personally believe, I'm tired of arguing about immigration. You can implement every conservative policy, or every policy, I don't want to characterize it, that Tulsi Gabbard just mentioned. And in fact, many progressives are frustrated because Biden has largely left, people are going to dispute this, but Google it, it's true, has largely left Trump's policies intact. It didn't make a difference. I would bet money, part of me was like, fine, do it, and you'll see that there's no effect because you're not going to stop people who are in an incredibly desperate situation in their home countries from making a go at it.
Well, no, I agree with you in terms of the sanctions on some of those countries as being a reason. I disagree in terms of U.S. firearms manufacturers. As a proud gun owner myself, I don't think we can place the blame on SIG, Glock, or whomever else for that, Daniel Defense, et cetera. But if I recall correctly, Vice President Kamala Harris was supposed to be the border czar. And nothing against the VP. I have not seen any significant progress on this front. I haven't seen the president really speak to this. I've seen a lot of Democrats in New York and Chicago complain about Texas Governor Greg Abbott busing many migrants to their states. But the Texas governor said, well, why should Texas alone be the only one that has this burden on our taxpayers? If this is a Democratic policy of letting everyone in, and I understand what the Statue of Liberty says, but the Statue of Liberty, isn't in the Constitution. And in my opinion, and I'm willing to bet most of our viewers will probably agree with me on this, we need to have a cap on how many people come into this country. Now, some people will say, but wait a minute, Shermichael, we need some workers because Americans won't work certain jobs. I'll cede that point. Tell me how many people do you want in the country, though? But do you want 5 million, 10 million, 20, 30 million? At what point do we as a country say immigration is a choice by the United States citizens when and upon whom we determine to come into our country when it's in our interest? Not just this carte blanche thing where everybody all over the place can come and hang out as long as they want, like this is one big summer bash. Well, that's not the way immigration policy should be handled in this country.
I would argue that there is a limit on who can come into the country.
I don't think so.
The problem is enforcing the limit. The problem is
there really?
There's no ability to enforce it. There's no ability to provide for timely legal paths to immigration for people.
Where's the limit?
The argument that Tulsi Gabbard is making isn't that every immigrant is allowed to come to America. It's that Biden is insufficiently policing the border.
But I'm making that argument. I'm not talking about what Shermichael Singleton is making that argument. What is the limit?
What Shermichael Singleton do you think is going to have the effect of actually stopping physically people from coming across our many hundreds, thousands of mile southern border?
I mean, I don't know necessarily how effective a wall will be.
It won't be.
I agree. But wait a minute, I'm going to answer your question.
Sure.
I agree with relieving some sanctions economically. I also believe that we should utilize our military forces to work with some of those governments to combat crime and the drug cartels. That's important. People need to feel safe where they are. And I also believe if you want to come to the United States, you need to wait on the other side of the border instead of waiting over here. We have to have accountability. I mean, the amount of resources. Let's use New York, for example. Mayor Adams just spoke, I think, 2 or 3 weeks ago. He's a Democrat. He said the amount of people that are now in our city, over 100,000, will fundamentally change New York City forever. We can't pay for this. We can't afford struggling New Yorkers who are native citizens, who are American citizens. And yet now we're supposed to spend an additional $40 billion on people who are not from here? It's like we don't care about our own citizens, but we're so willing to welcome everybody else and say, Americans, oh, no, just wait a little bit. We'll get to you guys last. How in the world is that fair?
I think, for one, people tend to weaponize the idea that there are limited funds. When they're talking about issues like immigration, when there's absolutely no political appetite for spending money in lieu of immigrants being here on the needy Americans that exist in this country. We have 500,000 homeless people in this country. I haven't seen any political appetite for dealing with that problem. A relatively small number of people, mind you, 500,000. There's more than 500,000 empty, vacant houses in the United States of America, or whatever you want to do. Republican or Democrat, nobody cares except to use it as a political tool to yell at the other side, except, I would say, Bernie Sanders, who actually had a plan in his 2020 platform to end homelessness. Sorry, I got to say that as a former press secretary. I happen to have that knowledge on hand. Now, New York City has more billionaires than any other city in the world, with 136 billionaires in 2022. I'm sorry, I find it rich, pun intended, to say that there aren't actually resources to provide for their... So it's their responsibility
to do the government's job now?
No, but I think that when you have an affluent tax base and you're at the same time advocating that the taxes on the rich shouldn't be raised, even though the majority of Americans think that the taxes on the rich absolutely should be raised, and you have largely rich people, you see this in San Francisco, it's Silicon Valley elites that are the loudest about the tragedy, the legitimate tragedy that is unfolding on the streets of San Francisco, at the same time that they don't want to contribute to the tax base of the city that they profit so much from being in, I think that's a conflict of interest. I think that is a bad faith criticism.
I disagree with that, because in places like Chicago, if you've seen the videos, it's black residents who are complaining about this. Maybe some wealthy folks in Chicago are.
Well, a lot of people complain about.
But wait a minute,
Sure,
because you said it's only the wealthy folks
I did not
in
say
San
only.
Francisco, for example.
I did not say only. I said they have a bigger responsibility because of their wealth.
How is it their responsibility, Bree, to do the government's job?
Wait, I'm sorry.
How is it their responsibility?
How do you think the government should do its job with no? I'm a little confused.
So does the government not have?
Conservatives seem to think that we have a deficit problem and that we can't pay for anything.
Which we do.
But they also complain about social ills, which require money to fix. But they also complain about taxing the rich to fund the government to address the social ills. So what is the strategy for dealing with homelessness? And keep in mind that funding the police more also costs money, and in fact costs more money to throw these people in jail and put them up for food and housing for the rest of their lives in prison than it does to simply give them $5,000. Recent studies show just giving homeless people $7,000 is much more effective in rehabilitating them and getting them off the street.
And guess what?
What?
I don't disagree that we should care for Americans first. We should. We do need stronger police officers. We do need well-trained police. Have you not seen what's going on in San Francisco with these kids going into Louis Vuitton, Chanel, just taking whatever they want with zero repercussions?
But did you disagree with?
We should hold those kids accountable. To your point about law enforcement.
But did you disagree with me about the?
No, I agreed with you in terms of
$7,000.
I agree in terms of taking care of Americans first, including homeless Americans, before we take care of illegal immigrants coming into our country. That's what I agree with you on.
But I thought I saw you nodding, and that you had also seen a study about how giving homeless people $7,000 rehabilitates them much more effectively than throwing them in jail.
If that means prioritizing Americans first, then sure, I agree.
Those are American homeless people.
If it means prioritizing Americans over illegal immigrants, I agree. And so I think you have not all Democrats, not all liberals, not all progressives, who make the case that these people are trying to flee these war-torn countries, or they're fleeing poverty. There's poverty right in the United States of America. There are a lot of Americans who grew up in urban, rural areas, who grew up and lived with PTSD their entire lives. What are Republicans and Democrats doing about that? What are Democrats doing to address that?
They should do something
over
about
some of the illegal immigrants that they want to just come into the country with zero regard for the American people.
The reality is that neither political party is doing anything about immigrants or the homeless, or poor people. So it's like, this is just a political basketball. Who cares? Nobody's helping.
But Bree, it's a Democrat in the White House.
So
with a Democrat vice president, with a democratically controlled Senate, previously a democratically controlled House. What are they doing? What have they done?
You don't have to. We haven't hosted very much together. But let me be very clear in case it's not clear. I hold Democrats more responsible for these ills because they're the party that represent to the public that they are the last line of defense in favor of poor and working people. And they've been lying about it for decades. So I entirely agree. But what I'm not going to do is sit here and say, well, because it's Biden's fault, Donald Trump would do a better job. Or because Democrats have failed, Republicans are going to do better. Or Republicans have more of an interest in actually addressing the immigration problem. Historically, before Donald Trump, the pro-immigration position was a Republican position.
It was.
Because it's like a free market, bring prices down sort of a position. And Bernie Sanders is on the record back in the 80s, and opinions he's had to justify and smooth over, of saying that having a more open immigration policy is destructive to the interests of working Americans. If you go back and watch a debate between like watch like a 1980 odd presidential debate, a Republican debate. Both candidates, all the candidates sound more to the left than anybody you hear in a general election
notice,
today.
I'm not saying that the current iteration of the Republican Party today or the Republicans of the past would do a job that I would find efficient, or that I think most conservative voters would find efficient. What I'm merely pointing out is that Democrats, in my opinion, and you may disagree with me, some of the viewers may disagree with me, appear to be more open to letting people come into the country with zero repercussions. And I do not think that that is acceptable. This takes a toll on communities across the country. These folks bring in crime, they bring in drugs. It costs taxpayers a ridiculous amount of money. We have enough issues in our own country with our own people, for goodness sakes, that we need to deal with first before we deal with people from Venezuela and wherever else they're coming from. And I'm not anti-immigrant. I understand that immigrants do fulfill jobs and roles that Americans necessarily don't want to do.
And pay $10.6 billion into taxes that they can't recoup the benefits of.
And I understand all of those things. I'm merely saying we need structure, we need order, and we need a cap on the number of people coming into this country.
Like, all I'm saying is that nobody disagrees with that. The problem
So
is,
why aren't Democrats doing anything about it? I'm just asking.
I feel
I'm not a
I feel like
Democrat.
we've all covered that ground because nobody has any political will to do anything that needs to be done because it's a foreign policy
But Democrats
issue.
care so much about
It's a
working
foreign
class
policy
people.
issue.
They want to make sure everybody's
Look,
not struggling and making it.
If Republicans
Clearly
want to lead
not.
on this, I would welcome that. If Republicans want to stop just exclusively talking about Ukraine because they think it makes Biden look bad, you know what else makes Biden look bad? Him maintaining sanctions on various countries around the world that are driving an immigration crisis. I would love for the right to unite, for the Freedom Caucus to take up as its cause an immigration solution that actually gets to the root of the problem by saying we need to lift draconian sanctions on half of the world. I think we can agree on that.
I agree.
But that's who's not saying that.
I agree.
Either political party.
Well, maybe you and I should run for office then. What do you guys think, Briahna in Congress? Maybe we should make that happen.
Never again. Never again. The Bernie campaign for 10 months or a year or whatever was my max, and I'm out. But I appreciate the sentiment, Shermichael. Stick around. We'll have more Rising for you right after this.